So, if you have seen any of these stories that have been on Fox 5 or any of the local media about the new discovery of rock mounds over in the Little Mulberry Park Pool Mountain area, I got to go see these rock formations. If you've been in Little Mulberry and have walked down the ravine trail side, you have seen similar stacks, nice round um, rock piles put up. But these, there's a lot more of them in this area, and there's also a number of them that have some sort of circular kind of fence, almost like pattern around them, but it's uh, I don't know the rhyme or reason as to why they're placed. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a historian, so I've got to look at it from a little bit different angle. Um, to me, the thing makes sense to go and look at any of the research that's been done or anything like that. Now, what I'll say is the developer did have Webb and Associates come out and do some searching on the site, and here's what they came up with. The summary of their findings is as a result of a 2004 survey that he recorded, which was the same, just the property across the road. He had found some based on literature. He doesn't think that any of these things are anything other than where people have tried to clear the land for agricultural purposes. I don't know that that's the right answer, but he does point out that, with this letter, December 9th, 2022, and he's referencing 2004 survey that he did across the road, that none of these areas have been physically surveyed for any sort of resources. But he says, there's some historic mill ruins straddling a stream, and the historic stuff that's there, based on literature, he does not say that any of this stuff should be recommended for preservation outside of that historic mill. So that's a little worrying. Now, what I'll say is he draws his conclusions from a 1990 article, which is sort of seen as a lot of the baseline for the way people argue about these stone mounds. And on my website, I linked it here on the links page, article about stone piles. It comes out of a 1990 early Georgia archaeology. And he goes down to the bottom, and what the Webb and Associates paper draws out is down in some of the conclusion portions where he said that the rock piles that he has uncovered, that he hasn't ever seen anything, and the ones that he's uncovered that have said prehistoric origin, anything he's looked at has just been historical, never found anything else. What he doesn't pull out of this article is what he goes on to talk about, and that is that Gresham calls out a number of places where things are found, and even in his conclusions, Gresham's conclusions about it, he says, although I've suggested that the issue of a historic versus a prehistoric origin of piled rock features become more clouded with recent research, it still seems that only through more documentation and excavation will the issue ever become clearer. So here with this developer, we've got an opportunity to do more excavation, do more research to help make this thing more clearer. And he says down at the bottom of his conclusion, he says, let me get to the right sentence here. In spite of the effort devoted to this paper, I view the study of historic period rock pilings not so much as an important realm of study, but mainly as a means toward the goal of reliably distinguishing them from prehistoric features, toward the ultimate goal of understanding prehistoric societies as reflected by piled rock features. I suggest that research into rock features continue much in this manner as it has recently, but with a renewed emphasis on obtaining empirical evidence of origin. Specifically, the following measures can be taken. So he says, although there's a lot of historical stuff, we still need to do a little bit more research, and he calls out, Gresham does, these things that should be done. He says we should continue to record, sketch map on the survey, the surveys, transit map, rock site features. We should continue to test, excavate rock piles and stacked piles. Although the overall majority of excavated piles have been devoid of artifacts and features, some do contain empirical evidence of their origin. That says we don't need to just shovel test in the area. We need to actually go into the pile and see what's happening. Continue to deed and record search tracts of land containing these features. More fully document the patterns of historic rock piling. This is a great opportunity to do that. Try to determine if the shaped rocks found were made with a steel hammer or hammerstone, and that can be seen kind of along the edges of how they're built. And then, while focusing on gathering evidence, continue to explore and debate theoretical alternatives. So he says that although it may be historical, we need to make sure that we're talking about all the other things it could be. Could be prehistoric or something like that. That's the paper that is cited in in the RS Web report done for the developer. Now, let's take a step over and look at the actual site a little bit more closely. And here's what I'll do. Let's take a look from the historical survey. Now, what you're looking at here's Hog Mountain Road, Mineral Springs, here's Little Mulberry Park, and here's Pool Mountain, and where this plus sign is kind of through this area in between this subdivision and this subdivision, all of this heavily forested area. This is where a number of these rock features are located, all up on top of this mountain, various places all through here. And actually kind of down through this little cut right through here is where that historic dam is. There actually are two historic dams there. They correspond to an 1880 non-population census with a sawmill that was run by a tub existed on the Mulberry watershed. So that's what that is right there. Now what I've done is I've pulled, let's just go and see if we can bring in, there's the 1964 Auburn and the 1964 Hog Mountain quadrants. You can see this before Little Mulberry Lake is flooded. And here is Pool Mountain. Here's the area. Notice the houses at the time are just along Clack Road. Over here is Mount Moriah Road. And here's the top of Pool Mountain. There's a place right here just up above this that was called the Boneyard, where people used to go dump their old animals and things like that. But notice the dashed lines. That's a dirt road. That's an old dirt road that became Mineral Springs. Now, kind of look around. You can definitely see the changes that have happened over time. Just a few houses along the main roads. No houses listed back off in here. And even down at the bottom, no houses in this bottom land. Now, you see the topographical lines are extremely close together right here. That tells you how steep some of that area is. You got a little bit of flat here at the top ridge line, but as soon as you start down that ridge line, and if you've driven this road, you've seen how steep it is. All right, so that's a little bit of context about that. Let's take a look at the aerial picture. So there's aerial photographs from 38 all the way up through 72. Unfortunately, not all the 38, 39, 50 are available online, but the 1960 is fairly available online. So you can kind of see the shape of Gwinnett County right here. Here is the turn that's right at the place of Hills Mill on the Appalachian River, and we know the site we're looking at should be just north of there, probably about slide 15 or 16, I think. Should be about right there. So if I click that, should get a pop-up image, and yes, this is perfect. So what we want to see, let's make that a little bit larger and zoom in there and see what we've got. Now, you draw your attention. This is very very good companion for the topographical map we just looked at. This is 1960 overhead pictures, and the map we looked at was a 1964 USGS. So if I were to give you an idea, right in this area, this is 324, commonly called Hill Shop Road, and this is Fence Road. This was the fence community back in the day. Publix is right in this area right now. So Fence Road comes up, makes this little turn. This is the Fence Road entrance to Little Mulberry Park. So Little Mulberry Park is now up in this area. If we continue down Fence Road, this split coming off right here is Clack. So as we would go down Clack Road, we would see that it would take us all the way over to Mount Moriah on this side. But right here, we can see that Mineral Springs breaks off, and if you'll notice, goes down through here, back up over toward the top of the hill. Notice how much it's covered by the tree canopy right there, how steep it all is. So there's a little bit of field here and here, some farming right in this area, which now that subdivision kind of comes back in this direction, and all of those rock features and formations are kind of back in through this area. All right, so that's where we would be looking at them on a 1964 overhead view. Gwinnett County looks very different now. So that's that picture. Now, a couple other things that I will call out is that there was a study done just published in 2019 at the River Glen subdivision, which is up in Jackson County, of some similar stone features. Now, these stone features ended up yielding human remains, as well as a variety of different time periods of things. So you'll see that the artifacts that they recovered from their excavation, late Mississippian wolfskin phase, thin-lined incised carnate bowls, Middle Archaic Morrow Mountain, Guilford Briar Creek, Piedmont, Allendale. These are all periods of kind of pre-contact history, some of it overlapping. So you see some of it is 1515, 1617, and then a lot of the other stuff is before we see much movement in this area. So there is a good evidence that just up the road there were Native American items found, and it's definitely very much worth taking a look at. Now, to say, let's put it in historic context, let's look at it to see where does this fall, when could these sorts of things happen. Okay, if we were to look at a kind of a timeline of Pool Mountain, I've got 1790 to 2023, kind of the ends of the spectrum. Why do I go back and say 1790? This is really the first time that we begin to see any sort of settlement or mention of areas adjacent to it. Something else I'll call out here is, you see I've got logging operations 1940. Mr. Holland Maddox, his nickname's commonly called T-Model. He is 94 years old, and as a kind of a preteen and teenager, he assisted in logging off of Pool Mountain and said it was covered in trees. That's why they went there and logged some stuff off, as I believe he worked for old man Carl Kane doing that work. But that's 1940, so we know it's covered up with trees in 1940. So if the rock mounds were historic, it's probably going to happen sometime substantially before then. And if he's cutting down trees in the 40s, we know that by, that midpoint between 1790 and 2023, 1906, kind of be that middle line, that those trees are probably starting to grow 1906. If they're pine, if they're oak, they're probably even earlier than that. So I'd say that midpoint to 2023 is not any time that we'd see the stone stacked. So the best thing now is to kind of let's split that and take a look at some details. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit and we go from 1790 to 1906, let's start breaking down and kind of looking at what's happening in this area and use some numbers to help figure it out. Now, 1906, we know that there were probably some trees starting to grow that T-Model logged later, but you heard the mention of a mill that was on that creek. And from that non-population census, we know that there was a tub sawmill on the Mulberry. And so that tub sawmill we know was in existence in 1880. Could have been sooner, and they were sawing trees. So there's no doubt that there's some old growth trees in that area in 1880, which means those trees had to start growing further up the timeline from there to be pulled down. Doesn't mean there couldn't have been farming going on, but we know that this is kind of a key marker. Now, these gray figures I've shown you underneath, these are the populations of Gwinnett County at certain times. Now, of course, 1820, that's the first census since Gwinnett becomes a county, 4,500 people. So we kind of expect that because it's very early on, kind of on the cutting edge of the frontier, but it gets huge. It goes to 13,000 by 1830. And I skipped forward to 1850 because, again, that's kind of a midpoint here. And notice that even with the growth of probably internal population, all of a sudden the actual population number drops. That's because the land has exploded west. By 1830, you're starting to see Alabama, Mississippi, those territories completely open up. The other side of Tennessee starts getting filled up. People begin to move down toward the Florida area and even out west to Texas. And so you're seeing all those numbers drop and go away, and there's not a lot happening. So this number right here, the 700 to 1,000, I pulled the census records for 1850 and 1860 and tried to make a best case scenario for how many people lived in the district that Pool Mountain was located in, and it's kind of on the edge of Duncan's, Canes, Rocky Creek, so the dividing lines are near and close by. But what you're looking at is probably in that area, which, to give you a rough idea, would have encompassed from the 124, 324 crossing all the way back across over toward Auburn, Georgia, because there's no Barrow County at this time. So it would have gone kind of that huge stretch through there and would have gone, north of I-85 down to not quite the Elijah Wynn House, but kind of a big block going across. 700 to 1,000 people is about all that was in there. Now that's not a huge population for such a vast land area, and it takes a lot of labor to move that much rock and stack it up. So that's one of my concerns there, is as we're talking about these rock piles as a historic feature and we want to be open to theoretical arguments, I'd say that's one of the things we've got to take a look at, is that there may not have been enough hands there to actually physically move the rocks to make these piles. So we may want to look back over here. So let's zoom in even closer back to these earlier times. Now, if I say I want to split it to between 1790 and 1880, 1830, kind of 1840, right here is kind of the middle of that. And that's when we're seeing a huge boom. So if there was a chance for historic stacking, it probably happens right in here, almost 200 years ago. So even if these are historically stacked rock piles by farmers, the fact that they happened maybe 200 years ago holds some pretty high value as a historic marker. And we could probably learn a good bit about the people that were there by excavating these, whether we find some type of flatware or some type of pottery or even early, plates or things like that. We can match those patterns with time dates and help stamp this a little bit better. But you're probably looking at a very limited time frame, because remember, right here, we're in 1880, we've got a sawmill. There's enough wood here to run a sawmill pretty much full time on the property, so those trees had to start growing back here around 1850 or so, maybe even before then, to get big enough to make use of a sawmill and the substantial building of of 2 dams and a tub mill on the site. So we're really looking at some old stuff, whether it be actually made by farmers or truly made by pre-contact or Native Americans. Let me tell you why I talk about settlement beginning in 1790. Okay, what we're looking at right here comes out of the Hargrave Library of Historic Papers at the University of Georgia. This is from 1793, where General Elholm, at the request of the governor, made a trip across the northern and western frontiers. He actually calls it the western frontier of Georgia, to map out where all the block houses and defenses were. This is often called the defensive plan of western Georgia. Now let me outline a few key spots. Here's the Oconee River, and you'll see here's Fort Matthews, and you see down here it says South Fork, North Fork, in that area. This area right down here where Oconee River is written is near where US 278 crosses from Morgan County into Greene County. So between Greensboro and Madison, that's this area right down here. And then up above that is where we come up to Fort Matthews. Now, the area that we're talking about on Pool Mountain is not shown in this map. It would be off to the left-hand side of the map. That's where the South Fork, the Appalachia, would come off to. This is where the Mulberry and everything else is. It's not shown on the map. So in 1792, it's not even part of the defensive plan. You see all these other blocks. They are block houses, stockade forts. Right here is Hill House Ironworks and Hill House Forts, where they used to cast cannonballs for the Revolution, and then they did it during the War of 1812 to supply some other forts. But this is up near Hurricane Shoals in Jackson County. And then you'll probably recognize Neal's Creek, the Broad River, and then you'll see there's a trail up here. You'll see Currahee Hills, Currahee Mountains right up here. And there's Wofford's settlement. So if you're familiar with the 4 Mile Purchase Woffords, this is not far from Tate's Creek Baptist Church, off of, I think that's 386 that comes through the Narrows and goes back over toward Baldwin. That's kind of where that area would be right there. Coming across, of course, you'd have Fort Hollingsworth, which is still standing, that you can actually go see. But that's what's going on right here. So in 1792, there are no blockhouses documented. And it's not just the map that we're talking about. If we were to go take a look at the full paper, it is about 18 pages of explaining where each fort is and how many families are there. In some cases, there's only one family per blockhouse, and they spend most of their time in the blockhouse. And they talk about that anything they've got is right there around the blockhouse as far as agricultural production and things like that goes. So if we go back and look at our timeline, just kind of square it all up. 1790 settlement, we say, begins, but remember that defensive plan is 1792, and we don't know if there were anybody over here at that time that much. We do know that by 1820, when they survey the Appalachia, that places like Hill's Mill on the Appalachia exist. We know there had been an Indian skirmish there in January of 1815, so there's still hostilities that occur all the way up until this time. So there could be evidence of something happening right in there, maybe that period up to kind of 1830. I don't think you would see anything kind of 1830 through 1880 as far as clearing that, because you're starting to see that population go further west, and people are probably not grabbing new lands and getting them. Now, a detailed research of some of the land deeds and grants would be useful. That will take a little bit of time at the state archives, as well as digging through different collections that are available. A number of nice ones at the Historical Society in Lawrenceville can help work us through that. But nonetheless, these rock piles, what we've got is truly something historic. It could be they truly were just clearing of land, but I think the shape of what I saw, the unique outlines of a number of them, tell us that there could be a lot more underneath it. It deserves more research than just passing it along and saying, it probably is just another one that something farmers piled up, let's keep moving. It deserves the time to get in there. And I think that needs to be done. It needs to be done by people who are truly interested in it. And I think it needs to be done by an independent firm, not by Webb and Associates, because I think they drew some pretty quick conclusions. And I think we could probably do a little bit better there. I hope that's useful. If there's anything on there that you would like to know a little bit more about or has been unclear, just let me know. Eli Stansel, the Gwinnett Rambler. Till next time.